Hi everyone, I want to talk about domestic violence today. Now the reason why I want to talk about this is that we've got to accept the fact that it is a scourge in our society and something for which mostly men have to take responsibility for. So if you're watching this and you think that you're having indulged in some violent and abusive behaviour and you're a man, you're probably wrong, because all of us at some point have done or said something that has been offensive or has been an effort to control somebody else. Now, if you haven't done that, don't watch the rest of this video because you probably don't need to. But I wanted to have a conversation about it primarily because it is something that rears its ugly head almost every day. We see an article in the paper in relation to domestic violence. And we know that a large percentage of women in particular, and some men, experience coercive control from their partner where, for whatever reason, the partner requires a person to do something that they would like them to do, but the other person doesn't really want to do. And they try to coerce them into doing the thing that the other person wants them to do. Over a period of time, what that does is it leaves a person feeling hopeless, helpless, and powerless in their world. And that this particular problem usually means that relationships become toxic, become even more violent than what they were when they started, and in some cases, people are either hospitalised or they're killed. And there's an example of this that came up in the Advertiser here in Adelaide over the last few days, which I think is worth noting. And particularly one of the things that I want to talk about is whether or not we should extend the penalties for those people who commit heinous crimes around domestic violence, where they particularly damage a person physically, or where they obviously kill somebody or attempt to kill somebody. Now, the thing that we need to think about also is not just about the physical assault, but also the emotional distress that causes the other person. Not to mention the impact that this has on children as well. And I've been working for 30 years in the area of domestic violence, and it just amazes me the number of people who refuse to take responsibility for the impact that their behaviour has had on the other person, particularly when they talk about, I think, the love that they say that they have for the other person. They're supposed to be caring and considerate and wanting to assist the other person to become the best possible person that they can become, while at the same time diminishing that individual, putting them down, calling them names, making derogatory comments about them, their shape, their size, whether they are good in bed or not, and a whole host and array of statements they make about the other person, which is just damn unhelpful. So in this article, which I'll now show you, and I'll talk about, the thing that when I read this, what occurred to me was, did this guy get the penalty that he deserved? That was number one. And the second thing I wanted to think about, or I found myself thinking about, was not necessarily whether he got the penalty, but what happens to his partner at the end of all of this? What services would be offered to her, whether or not she would feel safe living in a community in which this particular person lived. I think when you've been through, or my understanding is that when you've been through a horrifically violent situation where in actual fact you've believed that your life was about to end at the hand of this other person, the trauma that creates in you, the uncertainty, the anxiety, the stress, all those things, I often wonder, how does one recover from all of that? How could you ever, in fact, trust another person in your life to be able to know that you can have a caring, nurturing and respectful relationship? in my view, a lot of that stuff just goes out the window. And so every relationship from that point on will either be one or two things. It'll be another violent relationship because for some particular reason you think that's all that you can have, that's all that men in particular will be able to provide for you, or you'll choose to be very wary of any future relationship. And you'll also start to consider, if you've got kids, what sort of relationships they may enter into, and you become a bit fearful about when they have relationships and whether those relationships may end up being similar to your own. So if we just have a look at this article. So it is titled Lachlan Wayne St Clair jailed for 2 years for domestic violence, including choking his partner. So I don't know why it becomes including. He was jailed for 2 years for choking his partner, and probably a range of other things, abusive, dismissive behaviour, and a whole range of terrible, obnoxious, disgusting type behaviours. So he was, and I think this is indicative, he was a possessive man, needless to say, who placed his partner under surveillance to ensure she wouldn't go to the police after he held a pillow over her face and said he would strangle her to death. And he has been jailed for this. And the issue for me is, and I'll read this in a moment, is that his jail term, I didn't think, was anywhere near long enough. And I often wonder, well, what is the penalty for destroying somebody's life? Not taking it, well, that's bad enough, but destroying it mentally, psychologically. What is the penalty that should be exerted on anyone for ripping somebody's life apart? The district court judge said St Clair's offending has left his victim traumatised and suffering long-term adverse impacts. Now, should he get, 12 months, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? How long is she going to have to live with the trauma that's been created by this particular individual? Probably for the rest of her life. He gets off eventually, he gets out, as he did in this case, and he can go off and continue this sort of behaviour. What evidence is there that he has learnt from this incident and can make the corrections required in his life so that he can have reasonable relationships in the future? There is no evidence whatsoever that he has done any work. He may have come to the realisation that perhaps some of his behaviours need to be modified. My experience, and it's, I guess, it's a bit tainted because of the thousands of men that I've worked with throughout the years. And being a male myself, I know that it's very difficult for a lot of men to accept that their behaviours were unhelpful and damaging to others. And that when they do when they know that, choking someone's unhelpful, slapping them, hitting them, and being abusive, physically assaulting is unhelpful, they will often try and find other ways in order to manipulate and control others. So, and they'll mentally abuse, they'll use coercive control in order to see if they can get their own way. And until men realise that all of those behaviours are unhelpful, until they find other ways to behave that are going to get them what they want, which is often love and affection, then nothing's likely to change. There's one thing we do know, though, about men who are abusive, is that how they feel and the reasons why they are abusive, and often that's because they feel hopeless, helpless, and powerless in those relationships. So they feel insignificant, so they have to work hard in order to improve their own sense of worth and value within the relationship. The only tools that a lot of men have in order to do that is to exert that through physical force. Now, many men feel hopeless and helpless within relationships, I understand that, but very few men will talk about how that feels for them. So they wouldn't use those words at all to describe how they feel within a relationship, because using words and language to describe how you feel is something that just a lot of men don't do. And I'll be doing a session on men and emotions so that we can talk about that at a later date. They recommend, so they reconnected in August 2018 and were living in the Southern Districts when Sinclair began assaulting the victim. On December the 1st, 2019, Sinclair placed the victim in a headlock after a conversation about their relationship turned violent. He placed a hand over her mouth and told her he would strangle her to death. Following the incident, you effectively kept the victim, and this is the judge, you effectively kept the victim under surveillance to ensure that she did not make contact with police in relation to what had just occurred. So he knew at this point that he'd done something that was terribly wrong. He knew that it was a criminal act that he had done. And so he tried to control that by ensuring she didn't go out and notify the police. But clearly she did. He grabbed her by the hair, dragged her downstairs. Every time she screamed for help, you'd slam, strangle or force her to the ground. So we're talking about extreme physical violence here. You grabbed the victim by the neck, choked her, stating a number of times that you were going to kill her. He maintained, this is interesting. So he maintained his not guilty plea until shortly before the trial when he pleaded guilty. So up until that point, this dude believed that for whatever reason that he could either get off or that he would somehow escape from the charges that he was placed under. And it appears to me that a lawyer perhaps told him, well, the evidence is pretty damning. The judge is believing her. Whereas originally he may have been thinking, well, the judge will believe me. And why wouldn't you? You're a man who's kind of feel your own sense of self-importance in these situations, and felt, but probably believed that his behaviour could be validated by whatever it was that he thought that she was doing that caused him to act badly in the first place. Not an excuse, I hasten to add. So he then, at the last minute, clearly decided that it was best for him to plead guilty because he was going to go to jail. So he was sentenced to 2 years, 4 months and 16 days in prison with a period of 20 months. With the time already served, Sinclair is now eligible for parole. And so here we have this guy who physically assaulted, diminished, rebuked, created great sense of fear in this woman. It will change her life forever. And he gets 2 years and a bit, and for time served or whatever, he's out on parole. And there was no indication in this reporting, I'm not suggesting that there wasn't anything, but there's no indication in this reporting that in actual fact he has changed. And there is no compensation, I don't think, particularly for her, because even a financial compensation isn't going to make her feel better, isn't going to get rid of her anxiety and stress and the fear that sits with her because of what this dude did. We all, I think, and I'll have a conversation about this when I talk about men and emotions, but we all need to think a little bit more about why it is that we choose to behave the way we do. And when we notice somebody doing something or saying something that they believe, that you might believe is derogatory of another person, that you don't make a comment in order to correct them. And in many ways, in an unwitting way, I think we collude with others around this sort of behaviour that does tend to allow it to happen. We have pub talk. conversations about women that's unhelpful. And we, particularly us men, need to make a stand. And we need to do it as soon as possible, because these things keep on happening over and over again. So I'd like to think that you could subscribe to my channel. Let me know what you think, and stay tuned for other important videos around how we handle emotions and ways that we can behave that will enhance not only who we are, but the people who are around us. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being with me. Take care. Look after yourselves and be safe.